Folks, thanks so much for joining us today online. We're delighted to see you here. My name is Annmarie O'Kane. I work for the Centre for Cross-Border Cooperation. We are a small think and do tank in Armagh, so just based on the border, and we are, I suppose, very busy tracking and analysing cross-border trends and data, and we're always looking for solutions. Many of the things that we would focus on end up facilitating some cross-border collaboration that is often at the heart of what we do. So today online, I'm joined by Maureen O'Reilly, an independent economist, and Gillian Doherty from the Accounting Technicians of Ireland. So I'll get to you guys in just a wee moment. So just on this topic of the all-island labour market, this is the Centre's fourth webinar in this series. And these webinars follow on from a report that Maureen and I co-authored last year, along with Rose Tierney, a cross-border tax expert, and also Anne Devlin. The report was commissioned by the Labour Employer and Economic Forum, so we call LEAF, and along with the Shared Island Working Group. And that report examines the current conditions of the island of Ireland labour market, all of the challenges and the opportunities. We held back a little bit on recommendations just due to the what the report was, the purpose of the report, but we are always looking for solutions, and we're delighted that you're joining us today. So really what we did is we had a very in-depth assessment of what it means to live, to work and to employ people on a cross-border basis between Ireland and Northern Ireland. It was very much focused on this island. So the report explored a very wide range of issues. It looked at tax, pensions, social welfare, qualifications and skills, the mobility of workers. So think Brexit there, and the now that we need visas and our common travel area, given rights to Irish and British. So we had a chapter on that. We also looked at the changing world of work. So think remote working and flexible working patterns, and the change in way that people tend to work now on a cross-border basis. And we also looked at collective bargaining and trade union coverage. So there was quite a lot, and each of those chapters stood on their own 2 feet. They were independent, but what we found was that many of the issues that we found, just one employer or one worker could have an issue across all of those topics. So I suppose what we found was that whenever we look for solutions that are perfect for here, we have to be mindful that a solution on just one topic could have unintended consequences in other places. So that's why we were so pleased that the report allowed us to look at them all under one umbrella, if you like. I suppose the purpose of these webinars is to keep the conversation going, and we're going to look for examples of good practice as well. Maureen is going to take us through some of the issues that she found in those chapters while she was working on them. So qualifications and skills will be the focus for today. And Gillian is going to share with us an example of good practice, because we are finding a solution that's local to here. And it will, Gillian is going to share with us some information about a cross-border apprenticeship that's going to be launched in September time. So that's fantastic. So at the end of this recorded portion of the webinar, we will close the recording down, and then we'll have time to move into discussion. And I suppose mindful all the time that we're looking for solutions. So Maureen, you did the 2 chapters then within the report on these 2, so skills and qualifications. And we thought perhaps at the start we would mix them together, but they do stand on their own.
It was actually challenging. I think back to your point, Annmarie, that, probably at every turn, the issues you straddled across many of the, the issues that we were being discussing with businesses, employees, stakeholders, straddled across all of these things. So I think that was the difficulty in disentangling. So, at times it felt repetitive. It probably needed to be to show that the fact that it did infiltrate so many aspects of the work. But as I said, the qualifications and skills go hand in hand, but it was interesting. I'll bring you to it about when you did separate it out, what you found. So if it's okay to move to the next slide. And good morning, everyone, by the way, as well. So just as context, because I think it's always worth revisiting why we're looking at this. And, what we did in the report was we had a look at what does cross-border mobility mean. And we looked at it from a number of perspectives. The cross-border vehicle movement's huge. I mean, I was on the enterprise train on Thursday, and it was packed there and back, you know, to Dublin. We've over 1 million enterprise journeys, if that's in 2023-24. I imagine that's up even more again, given obviously the fact that, you know, I have the hourly service as well. We estimate about 18,000 cross-border workers and about 6,400 students. What we would say about that is that we do think that's probably a significant underrepresentation. The only figures we have to work off are the censuses and for the two jurisdictions, and how you interpret cross-border working, particularly now post-COVID, and obviously the censuses happen kind of in and around that kind of period. You know, it is with hybrid working is very different. So you know, the points I was made about construction workers, you know, they could be spent most of their time, you know, in either jurisdiction, but they wouldn't count as a cross-border worker. So I think that's important to note. 40% of Irish residents working in Northern Ireland are actually in public sector roles. It was really, really interesting again, you know, the extent to which there were actually public sector roles in both jurisdictions in terms of cross-border commuting as well, you know, health and education particularly being key. And obviously that's something that's in the last couple of years you've heard more and more about. But what does stand out is the border regions rely heavily on that mobile workforce. So when we looked at the figures, you know, in terms of that kind of solid foundation of cross-border workers, it was 80% plus of cross-border workers actually lived or worked in the border areas. And when you looked at Irish commuters to NI, 97% worked in specific border council areas. So, you know, it's important to the whole island economy, but it's particularly important to border regions. And it's even fascinating just work I'm doing at the moment, just on the kind of spatial, you know, geography of sectors and having a look at, you know, what that means, you know, how that, you know, how you develop border regions whenever you're thinking about spatial kind of the spatial economics, I suppose. But I suppose ultimately, you know, they are, as you can see then, a vital talent pool for addressing regional economic challenges and workforce gaps. So if we move to the next slide. Why it matters. You know, it's interesting. Skills can be a difficult one because I think the context is always, you know, what we have, we hold a wee bit with skills. You know, that if you invest in training someone, you don't want them to move to another jurisdiction. But I don't think that, you know, I think there's a much, you know, there's a bigger picture here, why it matters to make sure that the skills across the island, you know, work and can work in tandem with each other. You know, it enhances labour market resilience across the jurisdictions. You know, again, the context being we've two labour markets which are very tight in terms of you know, access to skills, and we know that from the Northern Ireland Chamber survey has been doing, you know, it's been noting that for quite a few years, particularly post-COVID. The All Ireland Business Monitor as well from Intertrade. So there's plenty of evidence about the skill shortages, you know, and obviously that kind of labour market connection can help to address that. Increased efficiency by reducing retraining qualification duplication. We'll go on to that in terms of some of the big issues that we find with this research, and the whole concept of economic integration and coordination, and then just supporting, as I said earlier, you can't emphasize enough that border region, you know, where people live, train and work across the borders, and that's particularly relevant from recent enough work that the SRI did as well. So, you know, it does matter, and you know, I even think of it in the perspective of, you know, if you've got really high quality jobs that come to either part of the island, you know, isn't it better that, you know, we can access, either jurisdiction can access those high quality jobs, particularly if there's skills that, you know, one jurisdiction has relative to the other, and it's part of the the selling tool, I suppose, in terms of why locate across Ireland, and that's again particularly important for border regions, as we found out from the research. So if we move to the next slide, thanks. I thought it was really important to set the context here, you know, and the fact that we do have a common travel area. You know, so there are workers and qualification rights under the CTA. It's a long-standing UK-Ireland arrangement and it predates EU membership, allowing free movement and residence for British and Irish citizens, and that's on rights to work, study, vote, access health and social care services. So, you know, there is an agreement there. There was an MOU in 2019 between the British and Irish governments that reaffirmed those rights, and that was supported by a joint statement from both. It confirmed that right to work for British in Ireland and Irish in the UK. and it recognises professional qualifications as essential to exercising that right. And it actually committed to comprehensive measures to support the recognition of those qualifications in terms of accessing living in one jurisdiction and accessing employment in the other. And both governments also committed to regulator cooperation to ensure that. And I can't emphasise that enough as a context. Much of the focus on the UK and EU withdrawal agreement was on free movement of goods on the island of Ireland, but there wasn't actually similar arrangements put in place for services, although it's covered to some degree in Article 3 of the protocol, which does say there should be application of the CTS. So, the CTS sitting in the background, and it should mean that these things take precedent and are considered at all times. So we move on to the next one, thanks. The mutual recognition, I suppose, one of the big issues, in terms of what we found in our research was we had, before pre-Brexit, we had this, automatic mutual recognition of professional qualifications across the EU and the economic area, including UK and Ireland. It covered professions, doctors, nurses, engineers, teachers. It was legally binding under EU law, so, I mean, that basically made, the whole concept of the kind of the ability to live in one jurisdiction, work in the other, relatively straightforward, and also then to move and work in either jurisdiction. So it was a really relatively straightforward process. In behind that, both jurisdictions had their own regulatory frameworks and awarding bodies. And while that is still the case, but post Brexit, the MRPQ no longer applies to the UK. It's not part of it. So recognition is subject to what is a new act that the UK has brought in. I think it's been in process since over a number of years, but it came in, I think, around the end of 2023. But the UK Professional Qualifications Act is key. Interestingly, I mean, I think I became one of those sad people that started listening into Lord's debates and everything about these things, because it's hard not to get involved in it. But actually, that legislation passed without devolved consent. Obviously, the executive was down for a period of time, but also NI wasn't involved in any amendments. So it's something that came in, a big concern, I think, and Northern Ireland wasn't involved in it. Decisions now lie with the individual regulators. So very much bottom up. And just to give you context there, there's 160 professions regulated by law in the UK, overseen by 50 regulators, and there's obviously other ones that are regulated voluntarily. And from what we could see, Ireland currently has 182. So there's huge amount. If you're thinking of it from a bottom up perspective, you've got an awful lot to deal with whenever it's dealt with on that basis. Again, back to the Common Travel Area MOU, confirming the right to work, but not guaranteed recognition of those qualifications. The Act actually explicitly encourages UK regulators and chartered bodies to consider having recognition rights to place for Irish professionals to ensure the UK is upholding the Common Travel Area commitments. I suppose the big word there is consider. And whenever you have anything that isn't kind of set in stone in legislation, that's where difficulties start to arise. But just to give you a very, very brief example of why this matters, before Brexit, a nurse qualified in Ireland could automatically have their qualifications recognised to work in the UK. That same nurse now must apply to UK Nursing and Midwifery Council, which assesses the qualifications independently. So obviously you have a separate system, and obviously then there's issues, etc., behind timing by that, no matter how well it works. But it just gives you a sense of it. Then if you move to the next one, thanks. A flavour of some of the challenges. What I would say is, this was at the point in time when we did the research. A lot of it was kind of towards the end of last summer. So things may have moved on. So, if you do see things and say, oh, actually that's changed, well, that's great. But this was really at a point in time. But, there are still problems we find, it's really interesting. If you look at the report, we've tried to give case studies of different examples of where there's challenges. You can see it in professional services and architecture. There's EU specific regulations. For example, a transport manager certificate, that was really interesting, about really trying to work out whether it applied or not. And in some instances, there were temporary kind of arrangements put in place, and then they're stopped, you know, but they're still, you know, it's difficult to know, you know, what should apply, but there are barriers anyway because of different exam standards there. Growing divergence, you know, for example, and I know obviously that's part and parcel of the UK leaving the EU and the fact that it was going to try and do things differently if it thought it needed to. But you know, what you do have there is, for example, a review of national occupational standards in social care and childcare, with potential ramifications then and how you actually think about movement of skills. Add-on courses for equivalency in nursing and pharmacy were often privately delivered and not publicly funded, so there's a cost associated with that. The advisory sector, I mean, we had some great engagement because of Annmarie's role with Border People. You know, we had some fantastic engagement at different aspects of their search to the advisory sector, and they were actually saying, I mean, it's quite interesting, if you have an advice sector is finding it hard, well then that definitely says something in itself, because they're the ones who are trying to make sense of it. They were finding it hard to navigate, and things like qualifications below GCSE level admitted in terms of trying to work out equivalence. The Department of Health, again, as we noted earlier, you know, health is one of the big cross-border worker pathways. They face barriers in training places due to incompatible curricula and formal regulatory processes. We've got some, again, really good examples there in terms of CARI, which is Ireland's health and social care regulator, and how they were challenged in terms of dealing with you know, candidates' information, had to deal with it individually, you know, and that delayed actually trying to appoint people, you know. I think there was a proposal to streamline that, so that might actually have been one of the kind of successes in terms of trying to get it. The apprenticeships, I mean, that's something that, you know, personally I would love to have a more detailed look at. I know it was something on the conscience of both jurisdictions. But basically, you know, the apprenticeship system wasn't working well at all. You couldn't, if you cross-border offices, you having an apprentice, you know, in either side of the border from where they lived became a difficulty, and you had things like having to have permanent, you know, a permanent payroll established, which again, Rose has gone into a lot of detail in the other sections of the report, but that whole tax piece fits in the background of this as well. Again, something to look at. And as I mentioned, CARU and just the complexity in actually trying to recognise qualifications across jurisdictions. So that gives you a bit of a flavour of the challenges, but we have quite a lot. And we've, you know, as I use them as case studies to get a sense of this, because again, we were really a lot of this was starting from scratch in terms of trying to work out what was happening, which was a big challenge for us in terms of the research, because there wasn't really any kind of conduit or platform beyond Annmarie's role with Border People, who were trying to make some sense of it, you know, and luckily we had that to kind of just to start from as a starting point. We move on to the next one then, thanks. I suppose what you're really talking about then is, you know, you've got that fragmentation and uncertainty, which I know is kind of, you know, is pervaded basically a lot of things post EU exit, and no, you know, challenges just even, you know, working around trade, and, you know, the fact that, you know, even for businesses, you know, and employees, you know, do you really know what you're supposed to do? And if you do, are you doing it? You know, so a lot of difficulties around compliance, but basically, you know, you have those challenges to cross-border qualification regulation. The divergent legal frameworks now apply, you know, and again, the fact that there's a legal basis really does change things, but you have, you know, the EU MRPQ, UK Professional Qualifications Act, CTA. I mean, again, back to precedence here as well has been another big issue throughout our research around, you know, what actually has precedent. There's no automatic recognition for vocational awards as well. And I want to draw attention to that because we'll talk about it shortly, but you know, even the opportunity on the vocational side of things is significant on an all-island basis, but you have qualifications. For example, the QQI Level 6 Advanced Certificate in Ireland isn't accepted for UK apprenticeships. There's no comprehensive framework for post-Brexit recognition, as I said, because the independent regulators make recognition decisions. There's no central coordination. You know, the discretionary approaches, risk inconsistency and timing assessment, all of this, you know, because it's that bottom up. And I mean, I think, you know, we described it in the report very much as a patchwork. where it's done well, it's great, but the problem is it isn't, and it's inconsistent, and that's not really any way to try and think about how you work on an all-island basis in terms of access to qualifications and skills. Again, a big concern for me is that NI's role is unclear in UK-wide legislation and the executive input, how formal is it really? At that point in time, it wasn't. Has it improved? It's really hard to say. But it's a big concern because, again, what I noticed was when I listened in, the devolved nations got very little airing whenever something was going through. Never mind thinking about somewhere like Northern Ireland, where you did have a very serious consider about what it would mean, from a cross-border perspective. The uncertainty remains over what, we used that word earlier with the CTA arrangements considered, so what does that mean? And, in terms of UK and Ireland cooperation, and again, that limited recognition of FE and technical qualifications across the border. So, there are very potentially serious consequences around the fact that, this has started to drift as such in terms of what it might mean, in terms of that movement away from what was a relatively simple process beforehand. And if we go to the next one, thanks, Lisa. I just wanted to draw attention just to the higher and further education piece as well. Because again, this is something that myself and Evelyn from ASRI and Anya Toner from UU are doing in terms of the brain drain in Northern Ireland. And one of their aspects of that is, in terms of thinking about, the all-island HE sector and the kind of, the movement of students either way. Pluses and enablers there. The CTM rights mean that Irish and UK citizens have the right to study and access support in both jurisdictions. What I would say is, in spite of that, the uptake of university places in both jurisdictions is actually very low, really, and GB would be a more natural kind of pathway for a lot of students. Now, there are reasons there, obviously, in terms of the types of degree courses they want to do and etc. But there are there are barriers. But on the positive side, one thing that has changed in the last year or two is there was a requirement for 4A levels in Northern Ireland to attend Irish higher education institutes, and that's actually been removed. So that's been a success. And there are some enablers in terms of scholarships, and teaching exchange programs, Scott Hens, etc. So there are some positives and enablers, but there are barriers. I say that low participation, particularly in preference for GB over cross-border options. There is still the Irish language requirement, which might deter Northern Ireland students, and there is a timing issue. So, basically, I know from just personal experience, the Irish offer arrives later than the GB one. So there's a move to basically accept the GB one just in case, and I think that's an issue. There are lower acceptance rates. Again, our research kind of only kind of got to the surface of that. Issues in there might be, to what extent you're kind of hedging your bets in terms of how you apply to universities. So it's something that needs looked at. And it is kind of something I am looking at the moment is the funding complexity. And again, the student grant and loan systems do differ and they can be difficult to navigate. And again, it's back to that point around, nothing set in stone with it. So you're sitting and you're not sure what the eligibility is or not on an individual basis. And that can obviously be a deterrent as well. And then cost of living. I mean, obviously, there's big issues in Ireland around the housing and accommodation costs and shortages, which can be deterrents. And then if we look to the next one in terms of further education, again, we have that kind of low uptake, high barriers for further education mobility. We have seemingly limited cross-border enrollment in FE. Something, again, was difficult to get at, without, again, some of these pieces of research, arguably, or Annmarie and I were chatting about this yesterday, they're projects on their own right. Try and understand them better. No formal mobility programs like there are in the higher education sector, like Scott Hens and University Ireland or Erasmus. The FE qualifications, I mean, again, I only got probably a hint of it, and Gillian would be better than me on this one as well, which would be interesting. But that fact that they're not automatically recognised cross-border, and you have those post-Brexit divergence in terms of recognition and regulatory differences. There are some employer-led or dual-site cross-border apprenticeships, but they, at least at the point we were looking at them, they were rare. But there are qualifications bodies, and Gillian will talk about it, which have tried to find all island routes, and we'll discuss the kind of the challenges there as well. But again, you're back to that lack of mutual recognition, and and what that might do in terms of hindering wider FE mobility. But there are collaborations as well. I've got an example at the bottom of ETU and Northwest Regional College, which developed a cross-border pathway in EV technology, which was part of the Northwest Education Cluster. And I mean, there are other examples as well, which we have in the report, which I think that you highlight, that I suppose there's a wee bit of it where there's a will, there's a way with it. Some of the medical training, for example, in the island of Ireland, again, back to ETU, etc., involving with that. And Shared Island has been, important as well in terms of some of the kind of the investment in courses as well. So yes, I say that, that's one that there is potential with, if there was that focus on trying to work at it. If we take the next one then. So the skills piece, it's interesting. Like when I went to try and do the skills piece, to be perfectly honest, I found it really, really difficult. I had very little to work off. And it felt at one point like it should just drop it and try and just put something in with qualifications, Annmarie said earlier, because it was so difficult. But again, I suppose to me that in itself suggests that there's a lot more work needed, in terms of the cross-border skills collaboration space. And I do notice over the last few days, that there, I think the Northern Ireland Skills Council, Annmarie, correct me, and the Irish skills body met, and I think there's been a couple of things in the last wee while which would suggest that this is something that is starting to be on people's agendas. But to me, at the point in time we looked at it, there was limited understanding of that kind of cross-border mobility in terms of skills and jobs access. I suppose a big concern would be the diverging employment laws. Northern Ireland isn't part of the UK in terms of employment laws. GB's making a lot of changes. I mean, they've reforms to working time, holiday pay, TUPE that don't apply in NI. And obviously in Northern Ireland, we've got the Good Jobs Bill going through at the moment too. But again, the issue there is just how does this impact in terms of what that means for the transferability of skills across the island. Something again which is consistent across a lot of the research we did in this report was that unclear legal precedent. We have this UK Retained EU Law Act, and Northern Ireland, is in the context in the back of this is the fact that Northern Ireland, is still maintained to some EU laws, so it's only partial alignment because of Article 2 of the protocol. So where does Northern Ireland sit and what takes precedent? So you've changing working conditions due to differing employment laws affecting existing and future workers. And I think that's something I'll talk about it shortly, but it's just a very difficult environment then when you kind of think of what it means to employ people. That lack of executive input into UK reforms on skills, immigration, hybrid labour models, unlike Scotland and Wales. So again, a very serious issue about when and where the executive should be inputting into these. That equivalence of qualifications and skills. Again, there's a bit of repetition here because it does fit back into the qualifications piece into the skills and examples of non-recognition across sectors. I mean, what I would say is that this is a big issue for employers. We had a really fantastic session with employers up, and it was hosted by Seagate and Derry, and we were actually oversubscribed with it. We had employers from both sides of the border all saying how difficult it was starting to become to employ people on a cross-border basis. And it took in things even like their terms and conditions, even insurance, etc. Lots and lots of issues that started to make it really hard to employ people, and again, that's to me where the red flag should be in terms of what can we do to make this easier. Workers themselves, I said, we had a really big survey of cross-border workers, and they were ensuring how to access equivalent training or recognition pathways. So again, one of the big issues behind the whole research was information failure, just not knowing where to go. I mean, you could say misinformation as well, but basically, the access to the information, who would take responsibility for that, and that was a big issue. And again, that CTA issue, again, something that was becoming more and more important was around the fact that, how our immigration rules impacted on a cross-border basis. And we had employers telling us they're actually afraid to let some of their non-nationals cross the border because they didn't know what the implications were for them, for example, even attending conferences. So, again, down to basics of how you do business and the fact that these things were actually holding business back. And then obviously context, it's a macro issue, but still something to consider, the fact there is this large earnings gap between the two jurisdictions. So Northern Ireland's earnings are about 2/3 of Ireland, or at least at that point in time they were as well. So we just go on to the next one, thanks. It was just to say, I mean, Annmarie can speak well about this too in certain terms of some of the kind of agreements that have been reached around border regions on tax issues, but equally there are agreements, in place, examples where there's mutual recognition agreements. Is challenging for Ireland because obviously EU law takes precedent, but there are models that have tried to shape something around shared mobility goals. So it mightn't be as much as legislative, but some form of way of trying to find automatic recognition or supported by something that allows it just to all happen faster. And there's a few examples there of countries that have tried to get around this through some kind of bilateral agreements. And MOUs are also a very important tool sometimes, and just even the fact that you sign something to say we need this to work. And then if we go to the next slide, I think this is just to sum up, any jurisdiction should value the role that cross-border kind of movement can bring. Skills and qualifications mobility is obviously essential, particularly to a small economy like Ireland, in terms of what that might mean in trying to keep skills here between Northern Ireland and Ireland. But the systems are diverging, between post-Brexit frameworks, independent regulators, legal uncertainty. There's recognition gaps definitely being created, so there's a lack of clarity around what all of this means. And again, I say the fact that there's that bottom-up patchwork approach is really unhelpful. That low FE and HE mobility, despite the CTA, I think is an issue in terms of you're thinking about how you're going to, particularly all the new kinds of skills that are needed going forward. And we see some examples of that in terms of trying to think cross-border already. But, the fact that, you have really good FE and HE provision in Ireland is key. And also a piece of work I recently did on sub-regional supports and the importance of that movement across universities, across both jurisdictions, Galway, Limerick, Derry, etc. The fact that you have those universities, students come, students stay there, it's a great way to grow sub-regional economy. So that mobility, I think, is really important. The employers, as I said, real obstacles, and it's very sobering to sit with them to chat about things around misaligned standards, the payroll complexities, and said Rose has lots on that, and pensions as well, which I think was a very unique aspect of our research that was brought to the fore, that it's not just about what you're paid now, it's what's going to happen in the future as well in terms of pensions and the qualifications mismatch. Would really like to emphasise the immigration hurdles. I think, is it 1 in 5 in Ireland's labour force are non-national and 1 in 10 in Northern Ireland? This is a really big and important group of the labour markets in both jurisdictions, and that mobility is really key as well, and I think something that needs looked at. As Annmarie said, we haven't really, it's something we're just in the process of looking at solutions. It wasn't for the remit of this report, but the cooperation piece, some kind of a framework and recognition, practical tools, shared pilot programs, all of these things, there are solutions that can be found, over different time trajectories, which could make this all work a lot better. And particularly now when that settling in period has happened, and we can actually see what does this mean in practice. I'm going to hand over to Gillian now, who's the Chief Operating Officer with Accounting Technicians Ireland, to take us through just the kind of challenges and opportunities from trying to find a solution to this. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Maureen, and thank you to Annmarie and Maureen for the invitation to join you this morning. Delighted to be here. I'm hoping that you can all see the slides there from ATI. Yep. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So ATI, traditionally, we've been around since 1983. We're 42 years old, and we have been an all-island body for the duration of that time. We have partners both north and south in terms of college providers. We work with regulators north and south. We're an international awarding organization, is recognized by ASEA. So we're an awarding organization in the north of Ireland, and then we're a QQI provider in the south. We have, despite the fact that we have had qualifications up until last year that have been managed and regulated in 2 different jurisdictions, we are fundamentally working off a common syllabus, a common demand for skills, and finance and accounting skills don't change, and they have neutral borders. So we find that our employers in the north of Ireland and the employers in the south, they have the same needs, they have the same wants, they have the same talent requirements. So in terms of establishing a good quality accounting technician education program, the needs are similar, and therefore we have operated off a common syllabus with some, I know Maureen talked about, the nuances required in terms of tax and legislation, and those would be accommodated within our modular bills. But ultimately, when you come out at the other end of our program, be it run through the North or the South College, or through ourselves in our academy, you will come out with the same standard of competencies, of skills, of knowledge, and you will be recognized as an ATI qualified technician. And as part of a profession, a wider ecosystem of in the accounting and accountancy profession. So we have operated like that, as I said, for 42 years. We have, in the last decade, we have looked to further broaden access to the profession via apprenticeship. And therefore we developed, initially in Northern Ireland in 2015, we developed higher level apprenticeship accounting technician, level 5, which has worked really well. And that program and the accompanying apprenticeship in the South still are working off a common syllabus. So the assessment process, the standards that you'd expect in terms of teaching, learning, assessment, all lead to a common award, if you like, of a professional award of MIATI through ATI itself. And note the change. I'm now using the word ATI instead of Accounting Technicians Ireland, solely because we have rebranded as in from June, so this month, all very exciting. And you'll see that ATI, Advancing Accounting, everywhere going forward, as a result of us developing an accounting technologist, which I'll talk about shortly. So the importance, I guess, of looking at putting our toe in the water of apprenticeship is, and I would have said this to Maureen in terms of the research, we started in the same position that we were in with our core qualification, which was that we would have as common as we could the syllabus, the assessment, the teaching, the learning. But ultimately, they were built for different jurisdictions and under different awarding authorities in terms of validation. So we, as I said, have been around doing it for 10 years. We've 2,000 people across the island have come through, and by and large, they've been new jobs. So when we talk about skills, there are lots of apprenticeships that are filling gaps and upskilling existing employees, but we actually create new jobs. So we, by and large, we've created the guts of 2,000 new jobs in that decade. And those apprentices come in and they are very much welcomed because there's a shortage in finance talent. They're very much welcomed where they have an opportunity of growing with the organization. And that's so important as we have a skills shortage. In that time, we've also partnered with employers across the north and south, many of which are all island bodies as well, and they in themselves. And we've created, therefore, at the end of that apprenticeship, we've ended up with 1,800 new finance roles across the island. We are this summer launching the first all-island apprenticeship with the technologist, and note that we are the first joint apprenticeship coordinating provider in Ireland as well. So there's a number of firsts here. We certainly, from the point of view of creating opportunity for those that wish to come into vocational education, we have a very clear pathway. No matter what way you come in, you'll end up a well-recognized industry standard accounting technician. And that apprenticeship is allowing people coming straight from school. So it's avoiding people having to put their hand in their pocket to be educated. It's fully funded. There's financial support in the south also for the employer. And so we have school leavers, we have mature learners, we have people that are returning to education, we have existing employees looking to reskill and upskill staff. So one of our core values as a charity is accessibility and relevance as well. So important. I mean, we'd all be out of jobs if we weren't giving the market what it needs in terms of core skills and giving people the opportunity to progress. So we have developed, as I said, the technologist, which is a further education step-on progression pathway into higher education. So that FET to HE progression pathway is now established, and we decided to do it via apprenticeship. Much harder work, much harder work, but we knew if we took what is effectively a brand new profession in finance, in order to make it easily digestible for the parent, school leaver, employer, employee, that we would define its occupation very, very well. So we did that as a result through apprenticeship. In the south, the apprenticeship is a national statutory apprenticeship, and therefore that has an occupational profile that is very clear. And in the north, we have it as a higher level apprenticeship, level 6. Now, just to explain, we took all the learning that we had from building technician in different ways in both jurisdictions, in cooperation with colleges north and south, with our partners, and we said, how can we do this even better so that it is fully recognized as a single program? And we ran into all of the headaches that Maureen has just walked us through in relation to the difficulties of having separate regulators and separate funders and everything that brings. So what we decided to do is start from the ground up. We did research with Red Brick Research House, quite extensive north and south, and we got extremely good feedback on what a technologist should be. And this is an internationally recognized profession, as it fits in. If you think about qualifications, there is an international education framework for accounting, and the foundation level is for technician. The proficiency level, advanced proficiency level, is for the accountant, and the bit in the middle has never been filled. So as we see skills develop and the demand for new and future skills arise and are here with us now and continue to change and evolve, in adjusting for that, we are now building the new business partner in accounting and finance and technology, so that the accountant can become that strategic partner that is required in terms of automation and AI, etc. So we did all the research. It's strange, and Maureen will know this, to go out to do research and have everybody nod and say that's a great idea. And you think there's something wrong with that. We'll go out and ask more questions. Surely somebody thinks it's a bad idea. We really had such a positive response to developing an accounting technologist. And I'll come to sort of the makeup of that shortly. But it's safe to say that we wanted this step on for our accounting technicians, so that they would be able to, they don't have to go on to college, they don't have to go on to professional accountancy. We have a community of practice of 10,000 across the island. And we have district societies, Ulster, Leinster, Munster and Western, all with their members, where they, at least 70% of those are happy to be accounting technicians, but they would like an opportunity to do something more with their own role in their own organization. And the opportunity to develop that technologist was vital. So what we did was, we did our research, we developed an occupational profile so that we could, sketch out the persona, if you're talking marketing terms, and from an educational point of view, it gave us a good, clear picture of what the program learning outcomes needed to be. And with that, we sat down and we looked at partnering. So we partnered with Open University Northern Ireland, we partnered with Technological University of the Shannon, and partners, our delivery partners in Northern Ireland for apprenticeship, Southern Regional College, Belfast Met, and South West College. And we took, kindly, they came together and we developed a program by building out the program learning outcomes into more modular, identifiable learning outcomes. And as we did that, we were collaborating in a room over months, and we developed effectively one common program that would be validated by Open University and by Technological University of the Shannon, that would have QAA recognition, would have QQI recognition in terms of being meeting all of the academic requirements that would need to be met. We also acknowledged that we would need an all-island consortium that would be representing both North and Southern employers, which we have. And underneath that, feeding up through an apprenticeship, would be the program board. So your academic board that you'd expect in any college, we have an all-island program board. Now, that wasn't without its difficulties when you've got two validators. So what we did was we agreed that we would have an all-island program board meet, and Open University's exam board, TU Shannon's exam board, and ATI's exam board on the work practice element would all meet, carry out the evaluation and ratification of those results, and then come up and report to the All-Ireland Programme Board. And that program board then would report onto the consortium, which has representation also, obviously, from our partner validators and colleges. So while I said earlier that apprenticeship can be difficult to build and difficult to ensure that it's going to be fit for purpose for the market in the long term, because you're building an occupation that you want to make sure that is sustainable in 10 or 15, 20 years time. You don't want to be taking it off the shelf. It's not a program like other programs. It had to be stress tested to ensure that this model of academic governance was going to work. And so it took quite a considerable amount of time to ensure that we got in and out of validation correctly with Open University and TU Shannon, which we did. We had originally wished to have a dual accreditation, you know, so that you would receive your accounting technologist parchment, and on it you would have both universities. That was a bridge too far. It's one we will revisit. But at the moment, getting us to this point took enough time. You know, we all have businesses to run, and the investment was enormous from our point of view. So we have created a technologist that we will bring those colleges and ourselves, those partners will come together to develop assessment to ensure that the program from an exam point of view is run effectively, to quality assure it. And ATI has developed a process whereby we will become the certifying body. So the certifying body sets the standard for quality assurance of the college provider or the validator, and ensures that the individual that comes at the end, that comes to ATI, will be eligible to apply to be a certified accounting technologist. And this will be a trademark, much like, you know, your CFA and all of those. So there's been a lot of ambition here to do a lot of things. And we've had to do it. And I know you've talked about, you know, the shared Ireland and the, you know, there's Peace Plus and all the rest of it. There was no money available for anything. So everything was done on goodwill. You know, ATI stretching itself all over the place. And the learning in that is that you can develop a Bachelor of Science, Honours, Level 8, Level 6, accounting technology, validated by Open University, validated by TU Shannon, all together in 12 months, from start to finish. So that is cooperation. You know, when you talk about cross-border cooperation, that is, to me, a best practice example in cooperation. And we would hope that will then translate as we come through as the first All Ireland, when we are we're at the moment just signing off agreements with the HEA, and we hope to be announced in July then as a national statutory apprenticeship accounting technologist in the south. We're already live in the north as a HLA. The importance of this for employers ultimately, in terms of skills and whatever about the qualification getting to where it needs to be, the maintenance and having the right skill set requires that we have that really strong feedback loop that means that what's happening in one college is the same as what's happening in another college. The technologist that now will be recognized as an individual working in finance and as a profession with CPD requirements and recognized by a professional body, this will be a product for export. This will be something that others want. And we've already seen a lot of interest internationally. So ATI is simply meeting a need. And I'm just going to move to, because I know I'm way over, I'm sure, Maureen, at this time, but I want to just bring you to the need itself. And the technologist is studying information systems, accounting and finance, and organizational governance. And the key areas, I suppose, in terms of information systems is all around data analytics, visualization, AI. And in organizational governance, it's sustainability reporting, ESG, corporate governance, really important strategic management, all of those really important future skills. That's what the burning ambition in here is to make sure that employers are ready for the areas that they need to start working in, such as CSRD, that's the sustainability reporting requirements. There are 40,000 people right now across Europe that need to be up to speed in sustainability reporting before you even look at supply chains. And those supply chains are enormous. So I just wanted to let you know that we're focused on skills outside of getting the program out there. We're focused on making sure that we stay relevant with these, and that we do that on an all-island basis to ensure that the standard is the same, because we want our technologist to be recognized as easily as our technician is. You know, we're widely recognized for good quality. I guess what you would call us, I beg your pardon for switching over there, what you would call us is a high reliability organization as a charity. We're all about quality. And we want to make sure that a technician on an all-island basis looks and feels the same and is the same no matter where I work. And we have a lot of cross-border mobility with our employees already in terms of apprentices. They are already, let's say, working for Deloitte, and then they move jurisdiction. You know, KPMG moved jurisdiction, more Ireland. So we've a lot of firms already cross-border. They're big enough to cope with some of the challenges that Maureen talked about in terms of payroll already set up. The SME market is the one that is the concern. So I might pause there because I know that I have probably overrun. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to meeting all of you at some stage in person and continuing the conversation at the annual conference, I believe, coming up shortly. Thank you, Annmarie.
That's brilliant. Gillian, that was a fantastic presentation. We could have listened to you for longer. We had, I suppose, for Maureen there, a very, very complicated overview of the landscape that we have in play at the moment. You mentioned there about being met with positivity, though, whenever you were doing your groundwork, research, and your analysis. And I'd have to say we were met with something similar when we were doing the LEAF report. There was an absolute eagerness for change, a real appetite for solutions. There was open doors whenever we were speaking to businesses and to workers and to those that were supporting them in the advice sectors. And what they frequently did tell us, though, whenever both businesses and employees were telling us that it was very, very difficult to get advice from a trained professional on a cross-border basis. So this is without a doubt tapping into a huge need. There would be a huge demand for these individuals whenever they get their accreditation. So it's fantastic. And you are absolutely right. It is a brilliant example of cross-border cooperation and collaboration. And you were moving around the obstacles. You had to negotiate, and that's what we've been doing up until now. We've been moving around them rather than actually being I suppose, part of a solution. And that's very much where we're, you are now a great example of best practice that can be replicated and duplicated in other sectors. And it's wonderful to find that example here on this island. We are very very keen to learn from other places, but it's always wonderful whenever we find those examples here. So I'm not 100% sure if we can get our own slides up, but it was just before we go into the discussion part, and we're still recording at the moment. I just wanted to let you know that this recording will be available on the Centre's website. It actually will link you through to our YouTube channel. So this portion of this webinar will be available along with all of the others. So you'll see the previous three were the mobility of workers, so think visas and all of that, tax and pensions, hugely complicated, and social security coordination between the jurisdictions. And then this recording will be added to those. We have another few webinars that will be coming along over the next few weeks. And then ultimately we're moving towards that annual conference. So that takes place in September on the 18th. And that will be in the Ballymascanlon Hotel in Dundalk. So a beautiful venue. We were there last year and it was stunning. So this year we're going to very much focus on the all-island labour market. We're looking at the challenges, we're looking at the opportunities, and we're really focusing in on solutions. So we would be delighted if everyone could join us there. You'll be able to find information about the conference on crossborder.ie on our website. So we'll move into the discussion part now, if that's okay. We will stop the recording, but thanks so much so far.